Thank you. Thank you so much to all of the people who've been waiting patiently on Zoom, joining us from all around the world. And thank you to all of the guests who are here in this room and also in the overflow room. A very, very warm welcome on behalf of the Climate Justice and Just Transition Donor Collaborative. We're working very closely with the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group, the YAG as they're called for short, and also with the Green African Youth Organization, GAIO. So my sort of brief job is really to introduce you to the two moderators, Heather McGray from the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, and Josh Amposen, who is from a founder of GAIO itself, and now works with the UN Secretary General's Youth Envoy team. So welcome, everyone. We felt at the collaborative, we've been doing a number of different convenings online and in person at high-level events, at the last COP, at the subsidiary bodies, at Davos, on how philanthropy can better step up and support more radical movements, support those who are really working at the grassroots and at the national level, support those who have traditionally not benefited from philanthropy. We know that philanthropy is skewed very massively in favor of those who are working at the grassroots, and predominantly in Europe and America, they've got the largest share of grants. Those larger grants and the core funding and consistent funding has tended to go to organizations led by men and by organizations led predominantly by white people. I mean, the figures are slightly depressing. We've put them in your concept notes so that you can have a look. And what we're trying to do as part of this collaborative, which started really as an initiative between 6 foundations last year, is to reverse that, to recognize that, to reverse that, to also understand how things must change within philanthropy, the practices must change within philanthropy. And the focus really of this particular webinar and the conversation afterwards is to see how we can act together, and particularly how we can work with those re-granters, those smaller, more nimble, networked organizations that are moving money very fast in a trust-based, very participatory way, who are responding very directly to the needs of the field. Absolutely want to say just a couple of housekeeping things for the people in the room. We are supposed to keep our masks on when not speaking and eating. This is a hybrid webinar, so the people in the room are going to have an opportunity after the webinar ends. So we'll be prioritizing questions by our wonderful Zoom audience, who are encouraged to comment, leave questions, and those will be passed on to the two moderators. And just again, for people in the room only, so that the people on Zoom can hear clearly, please be as quiet as possible, because the microphones are on the ceiling and they pick up a lot of noise. So thank you for that. So lots of information about the Climate Justice and Just Transition Donor Collaborative. It is an initiative where these foundations recognized back in 2018, 2019, that we needed to do, as I said, a lot more to shift resources quickly on the basis of intersectional ways of thinking, money to the global south and those on the front line and those who had not benefited, who happen to also be leading the most innovative solutions, who are bringing the most important constituencies left out of that. So let me pass over to Heather and Josh, who are going to engage and animate a lot of speakers. So they'll be they've got a tough job ahead of them, and I'd love you to kick off. Heather, thank you.
Sure. Thanks very much, Farhana. My name is Heather McGray, and I'm the director of the Climate Justice Resilience Fund. And we've been really working as a grant-making initiative to pool funding for climate justice and to support women and young people and Indigenous people in particular to build their own solutions for climate change and for climate adaptation and resilience in particular. My understanding is we need to do a little bit of musical chairs. Is that true already, or no? Okay, our panel is set up as it's supposed to be. And let me just briefly give you some intros. We're going to try to keep this snappy, and we're going to try to have really a dialogue amongst our panelists. Do we have Paloma here? I know she was a late arrival. Okay, so hopefully she will join us. But let me introduce Omnia Olamrani, who's from Egypt. She is studying to be a doctor, and this year she has been made the first ever youth envoy to the COP presidency. We're just delighted to have her here. Our second speaker will be Shier Baptista, who comes to us from Mexico. I'm so sorry. She is from the Otomi Toltec group and has been leading a really extraordinary an effort called the Rebirth Initiative. Finally, to Shia's right, we have Aisha Siddiqa from Pakistan. She's been working with a group called Polluters Out, and then also the Fossil Free University movement. So we're going to get to hear about from these three really exciting efforts. Archana, are you going to join our first panel? Okay. So Archana Sorang is also with the Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group, who's co-convening with us here. Most of their team is with us. And Archana, why don't we start off with you? We're going to go through one quick round here to help get a feel for the current state of affairs with the youth movement, and in particular with funding for the youth climate movement. There will be a chance to come back around for a second question, but I'd like each of our speakers to just kick us off very briefly with one gap that you've seen that's come up in your work, one gap in funding and the problems that it's causing. Archana, would you like to start us off? And we'll just kind of come around the table for this first round.
Johar everyone, it's a pleasure to be here with you all and discussing on philanthropy and funding and access of funding to young people and climate justice youth movements. I think one of the crucial gaps which I have experienced through my work and being part of the youth movement and also part of the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change is direct access to funding from the lens of young, indigenous, Afro-descendant, and local communities, women and girls. And this is not only in terms of women and girls, but also in terms of the entire youth movement, because there may be fund allocation, but it's not reaching on ground. And when I say there may be, it's also very sad to say in reality, there is very less allocation of funds specifically for the young people and groups. So I feel one of the key challenges which we are facing at the moment is accessing this funding, and also near seeing that there is no fund allocation directly for the youth-led movements in terms of the work which they are doing in terms of advocating for climate justice or advocating for on-ground work in terms of climate resilience and adaptation.
Thank you very much. Omnia, would you like to speak briefly about a gap also?
Yeah. So thank you so much for having me. One important thing I want to first reflect on, which is when we're thinking about gaps, we need to think about, and when we're also thinking about climate justice, we need to think about the evidence that really proves the need to invest in youth-led movements. Because now, if a child is born today, they're going to experience 4 times the number of extreme weather events that we are seeing. And then by 2050, 1 out of 4 children will not have access to the water that they need. And there are, as mentioned before, a lot of figures that really support the need, not just to think about investing in mitigation, but also thinking about adaptation, which is one gap that I see now. There's a lot of, and even if there are funding opportunities for youth-led solutions, they are there, but they are inconsistent. We tend to see one-off grant opportunities, but we do not see a way that is sustainable. And as well as we see a gap in how such opportunities are co-created by youth. We do not see a sustainable, formal, participatory, and diverse mechanism that is integrated within funders and grant organizations that really gives youth the platform to sustainably deliver their needs and the points where, for example, as we see now, what youth movements need, what are the priorities that we see, especially that we are at the front line of our community. So we get to see what we need. And for us to mainstream that in a consistent way, there is a need to have more formal participatory structures for youth, especially within funding organizations and philanthropies.
Okay, thanks. A couple things there.
Just our tech people are saying in the room, can you be really quiet? Because it is causing interference. So papers shuffling and little pens being clicked. Thank you. So,
well, let's see. We'll move on to Shia. Tell us what you're seeing in your work, Shia, and what your community is finding to be a gap in funding.
I think a lot of people, especially in the climate movement, and we see that in the concept note, the amount of money that goes into climate spaces is around 2%, but climate justice spaces is a fourth of that. And for women's spaces is about 1%. And these numbers, for me, they're not only astonishing because I think about the magnitude of the other 98, 99%. And I do wonder, how is that being used? Because I don't see all of these solutions being brought into communities, being brought into city planning, being brought into that just transition that we need. And I think for the youth movement, even if we do get a grant, even if we do get funding, we don't know how to manage money. We don't know how to budget it, how to allocate it, how to report the taxes on it, So I think when we talk about support, it's not only the financial support for me to get to COP27, it's also for my organization to have somebody who can review our finances. And we are not graduates from a university that can know the ins and outs. We're not accountants, basically. So the support has to be more complete and holistic. That's one thing. The second thing is that the youth movement, as of now, there's many global organizations. There's underground organizations, but COVID forced us to pursue global organizations. So my organization has people in every continent, over 11 different time zones. I don't know how that's possible, but that's what Slack says. It says you're sending the message to 11 different time zones. So I'm just going off of Slack. And what we see is that we are the most interconnected generation. And I know what my friend in Colombia is going through. I know what my friend in India is going through. I know what my friend in Singapore is going through in her neighborhood when she walks out of the door. And I know that they need help. She asked me to send her from the organization $12 so she can put together a program to teach people about climate justice and intersectionality. The money gets magnified, especially in the global South. And I don't think people understand how big of a difference $500 can make. And we have the ability through our global networks to create breeding grounds of innovation and imagination and possibility for our communities. So those are the two things that I'll say, and why it's so important for youth to get the management allocations as well as the support to help manage the funds.
So I'm hearing here there's a quality of funding that's not necessarily coming for the organizational development. And then there's this interesting dichotomy between global organizations and very, very small amounts of money. I also heard some gaps around activities like adaptation and around structures like participation. So there's some rich things already coming out in short interventions. Aisha, over to you. Can you tell us about a gap in the funding landscape your organization's contending?
Sure. My organizations, as you introduced me are Polluters Out and also for university. And for the first year of Polluters Out, we had a total budget of $0. And the only thing that we were depending on was our will and our commitment to kick polluters out of the COP space. And the industry we are up against, for every $1 we have, they have hundreds of thousands. For every one lawyer that we have, they have hundreds. We had $0, and we were taking on the likes of Shell and Exxon and Chevron and BP with nothing but pens and papers and doing our research. And all of us were under the age of 25. And to Shie's point, I think that it is very, it's nice to mention how much faith we have in youth and how much like we are depending on them to save our future. But if we really believe that the youth activism is important, then we must provide young people the resources to continue that activism. We must invest in them as well. And that investment goes far beyond just like making sure that our organizations are functioning. This work is hard. We've dedicated our youth to this. I started this work at the age of 17. I'm going to turn 23 soon. And that's my youth dedicated to this. And so investing in people is also making sure that when they come to conferences, they have a bed to sleep on, and they have food to eat, and they're not struggling to get around. But in addition to that, when we do our campaigns, and we need to spread our message, we have enough funds to buy posters and pens. Like, that's how minute it is. But on a larger scale, look at how much the youth climate movement has changed the discourse around climate justice in the past few years. And look what we were able to accomplish with little to nothing. And look how much, and imagine how much we can do if the people that we keep claiming are leaders have teams behind them and people helping them.
Well, hi everyone again, and thanks a lot, Achana, Omnia, Shai, and Aisha. First of all, very fantastic input from all of you. As an activist myself and working closely with all of you, it couldn't have been said any better. What I want to take the conversation to now is to ask you, from the inputs you've given already, from your perspectives, how could these gaps be addressed? So we are quite tight on time again, so would appreciate very snappy responses. But we are hearing micro scale support, we're hearing macro scale support. Very much agree with Aisha, your point around, it could be that minute as getting a pen and a poster, right? At the same time, it could be as big as having the whole philanthropic sector having a good budget already allocated and say, we're going to spend this money on climate justice. And how could this be better delivered from your perspectives? So I'll start with you again, Achana, and very quickly, from your gap that you've identified, how could funders really close this gap?
I think what is crucial in terms of how do we address this is first comes across like acknowledging that there is disparity and acknowledging that there is this issue of, inaccessible funding towards youth movement, because I think there's also a certain element of denial in like there is no issue and we are doing enough. And I think it's very important for us to accept that there is this issue of communities and young people not able to access this. And here I would like to share that we have been working with SIF since COP26. And we have been engaging in global study and research in terms of highlighting this. And during this course of research, we also realized that the numbers which is coming is very sad. And what we also realized that we need to engage in more of research, which is again youth-led, which we felt is so important for us to be part of these kind of research and curate. And most importantly, then after research, after findings of this very bleak numbers, how do we go ahead and reach out to young people? I think there is a need to come in interface and have a dialogue with each other where we are being able to share what are the challenges which we are facing and what are the challenges which the funders are facing, even if they have a good intent. And in line of that, I would like to share that I was part of drafting of call to action of indigenous, Afro-descendant and local communities, women and girls. And we have come up with a call to action. And this comes from an intention to work together with the funders, because there was challenges like we want to fund, but what are the issues and what are the facing? So also streamlining the processes, making the processes more flexible. Because one of the slight example which I would like to give is that the last year when during the COP26, I was reaching out to different organizations for accreditation and funding. The question which came to me, even being part of the youth advisory group member, is how legitimate are your young people that will fund them and give them accreditation? And this made me like taken aback, like how do I express or show the legitimacy, because the organization and groups which we work in are working in collectives in the grassroots level, in the regional level. They may not have those kind of very fancy websites to highlight their work, which is, if you see, it's again a business circle. You cannot have those kind of websites and resources if you do not have funding. And that's what made me taken aback, that we need direct access of funding and allocation to indigenous people, youth groups, and different communities. Then again, which comes down to third point, which I'll be summarizing, is that as a member of a UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group, one of the key things which we have been also realizing that we need climate justice funding, and we need funds to reach out to young people. And that's why we have been, with the support of UMI Fund, with support of Farhana and YAG, we all, like Nathan has been leading from our group on this. So we are also engaging in a climate justice fund, which is a way, again, as we were discussing, like a participatory approach where we are part of decision-making processes of how the grants are being reaching out to young people. And this is one of those initiatives which makes us important, that as Zia very rightly said, we are networked with a group of people and we all come from different constituencies. So we all also need to be part of the decision-making process of grant making. We also need to see that how the funds are being allocated in a sustained way, and in a way which is like comes down to like varied thematics. The last thing which I would like to say is that last year was a very historic moment for us indigenous people when we had the $1.7 billion commitment in COP26. And that was specifically for rights recognition of indigenous people over the land, forest, and territory. This not only made it broad open for the critical thematics like rights recognition, but also opened it for indigenous communities altogether. So we need that kind of drastic support and change from the philanthropists and grant organizations.
Thank you very much, Achana. Quickly go to you, Omnia.
Yeah, just to add to what Achana said, so really important about identifying the challenges that we face to access funds, and this is why I feel that my suggestion, I have three main, very quick points. First one is for grantors and organizations to have a way to assess how they invest and how they provide funding to young people. So to have a youth audit, a way that assesses where, how, and how much does the fund, and then also get feedback from young people to improve the way that they communicate and that they support the youth climate movements, to understand that every year has a different priority and how to cater that to the needs of young people. The second point is to, as I said, having a mechanism or having a structure within such organizations, so like a youth sounding board. And this is important because it really provides a space to go beyond just one-off events or webinars and to have it in a way that's sustainable. The last and most important for me is this year is the first time that there is an envoy on youth within the COP27 presidency. And we are very keen to have this initiative a way that is sustainable for all the future COPs. Climate change is not just about COP, it's also about what happens before, during, and after. And this is what we are currently working on. We are developing a platform because we also see a gap that there are so many groundbreaking and inspiring solutions and initiatives led by youth around the world, but we still don't have the platform where all such initiatives feed and all success stories, either grassroots impacts or young people working together with either civil society organizations or funding organizations, good examples of meaningful youth participatory mechanisms. So now we're working on a digital platform just only for young people to share their initiatives, their impact, also their needs, so that it is sustainable for this COP, but also after. So it's kind of, we're trying to build on the momentum for COP, especially that this COP, we want to emphasize the role of young people across policy, but also how our actions need to be translated into the climate negotiations. This COP is also about climate justice, and we also refer to this as the adaptation COP because for the first time in 6 years, the COP is happening in Africa, so it will also give the opportunity for the emphasis on adaptation and resilience and climate justice more than the success that we have seen, for example, last year when it came to mitigation and finance. So that's it from my side.
Thank you very much. I think you both raised very fantastic points, and I wish we had time to dig deeper into this probably after the webinar. But I really like the idea of how do you validate legitimacy for someone who is living through some of the lived experience and yet having to ask that question, legitimacy and credibility. And also like is website even a good way of measuring sort of the work that people do on the ground every day and around sort of transparency, accountability, feedback loop with grantors and their grantees within the youth movement. That is very fantastic. I'm going to turn to my left. So Shai, please go ahead.
So I want to use a word that was used just now, which is investment, because this is not just grant making, it's investment on the future, on youth. And I think in the world of money, that word means a lot because it means that your gains are going to be maximized. And what we're maximizing is the health of the planet and our ability to not burn out. Because I spend so much time figuring out how am I going to raise $10,000 to go to the next COP, that I am not spending enough time trying to connect with the Egyptian youth. This COP is the most expensive, and I think it's one of a kind because of how far away it is and where it's located in Egypt. And I don't know how to ask for $10,000. I never done that in my life, and I don't think I can look to anybody in the eye and say, are you cool giving me $30,000 for 2 other youth that I want to take as well? We just don't know how to do that as youth, and we shouldn't be expected to. So what we need is mentorship. What we need is lawyers, accountants, the empowerment to say from people to tell us, go and ask that funder for money, and it's okay. We need the staff at every philanthropic organization that's not just giving money to climate justice initiatives, but specifically for youth and how to follow up with our youth. And we also need it to be tailored, like Anya said, to the specific circumstances. So it's very different to bring somebody to Climate Week than to bring somebody to COP, than to bring somebody, funds for their event that they want to host in their small community. And so that's a list. I'll say it again: lawyers, accountants, mentorship, empowerment, staff. And the most important thing, mechanisms for transparency. And I say this because I, as a part of the youth movement, I want to know that if my friend is receiving money, what they're using it on. And that's totally fine for me to expect. We need mechanisms for transparency. If you spend $2,000 on a flight across the Atlantic, that's fine, but I still want to know. So those are the things that we need. And if you want the list again, I'll say it now.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Aisha, please.
Yeah. I'm going to start with yes, and because everything that they said is extremely important. And to just one thing to add to Shia's, we always bunk together because what happens is one of us, or it's usually Aisha, cannot find housing to go to events. And we end up sleeping on the same boat, on the same mattress on the floor, or like, if we're lucky enough, same hotel room. Is occurring right now when I'm here in climate event and I live in. So that's how like small it is. But on the point of yes, and we are against time. You guys all understand that, and we understand that as well. Things are about to get worse. In my country, 33 million people have been displaced by flooding of unprecedented scale. And finances from the philanthropy sector to the Middle East are of zero sum. The area of the world that has been most exploited for oil, that has faced the most effects of war and violence, and our resources have been taken, and now today our people are suffering. Philanthropy around environmental defending comes like, it doesn't come. And I kind of want to share with you what is actually going on ground. Women don't have menstrual products. They're giving birth in flood zones. We don't have nets to protect ourselves from mosquitoes. For the past 2 months, I've been operating almost like an emergency mechanism because I'm lucky enough to sit in the United States and funnel in funds to my community back home. People have lost everything. They don't have homes. We're trying to just get $1,000 so that one family can sleep in a tent for 7 days. That's how bad it is. It's about to get worse because the monsoons are about to get worse. The flooding is about to get worse. And we sit in conferences in the global north, in fancy rooms and skyscrapers in New York. And we have these events in places where we don't realize how bad the situation is and how urgent the situation is. Sometimes I want to tell funders and people who are hosting COP, host it in my country, host it in flood zones. You have to walk through the destruction before you can sit in your fancy seats and realize that we are up against so much. We have been depending on our military and helicopters to get people out. People are dying every single day. It's been 8 weeks, the country is still flooded and the water's not leaving. And that's one thing. But there's youth, Pakistani youth, who have been working day in and out to make it to news, we've kind of been on special operations. I'm on call all the time. And there's nobody supporting us except each other. Last point, this is psychologically training. You guys know about climate anxiety, but there's PTSD involved. When children face war, their brains change and their ability to function in society change. Similarly, so do children's brain when they experience natural disasters. The children of my country, 16 million to be exact, are going to have consequences for the rest of their lives after the destruction they've seen. What about their futures? So right now, it does not seem as urgent, but it really, really is, and it's about to get worse. And we need all of this and mechanisms to protect and save people and get them out when things get really bad during natural disasters.
Thank you very much, Aisha. And thanks, everyone. I have a background in disaster risk reduction, and when Cyclone Idai happened, when Typhoon Odette happened, I happened to work with a lot of young people on the ground. And Cyclone Idai was 2019, and as of now, there are young people who were teachers who helped the reconstruction phases, and as of today, they still cannot go to bed and hear the sound of wind or storm and not shiver and shake as of now. And no matter what the UN agencies are doing, what happens is that you cannot reach everybody if the local capacity on the ground is not strong enough. And hence, when I hear Aisha speak, and you've done fantastic work, I'm seeing you on almost every platform possible talking about the situation in Pakistan. And I think it's very important that you raise this issue here in front of our donors, because I think that the most essential part of everything that has been said is building and making sure that those who are directly on the ground and our first respondents understand the local context and would always be there and will not be here and there all over the place, have capacity to respond when these things happen. So it's very, very essential. And once again, I really appreciate all the fantastic work that you're all doing and the input that you've given. We're going to switch now and have a new set of panel join us here. So we'll move the table around a little bit. And I will invite Christy, Mahendra, and Mega to please join us. Right. We'll let this handle itself for the moment. And please try to pay attention to us. So a bit of a context. So we will have three brilliant female leadership philanthropic leaders with us. So Mahendra, very famous, everyone knows you. Christy, very happy to see you in person. Very nice to have you here from UMI Fund and also Mahendra from FIDA Fund. And you will have Mega from Doc Society and very fantastic work with the documentary that was premiered in London on Farhana's work. What was the title again?
Rebellion.
Rebellion. Perfect. I was in that room, I watched that documentary, and I was like, okay, this is activism and advocacy on a different level. But it was very good to sort of have these support documentaries that allow us to see and for every person in other parts of the world to relate to advocacy and activism in a different way. What we'll do now is for you to reflect briefly on what has been said already. We'll have two rounds of back and forth with you. The first one, I'm going to kick it off, and that would be for you to briefly share with us, what have you learned so far as a philanthropic, within the philanthropic sector? What have you learned from the youth movement and the youth justice space, climate justice space? And then the second one, we'll go a bit more deeper looking into your vision based on what you've learned. So to kick it off with the first one, and as I said to you, informally, the time is quite tight, so I would hope that you'll be very snappy with that. But I think it's very essential that as the youth activists and we communicate what we think is needed, what the gaps we see. We believe that you're also seeing this through your work, and there are some learnings, and it would be good to hear that from you, see how they fit into the gaps we are seeing, or if they are already even sort of controversial or going in the opposite direction, if you have more to share. So I will start with you, Christy, for you to kick us off on learning from UMI and also from your sort of working before UMI within the youth climate justice space.
Sure. Thank you, Joshua. And I'm truly honored to have the opportunity to come here today and to hear directly from the organizations that we support. That's an interesting question because we very much feel we're still learning. This is definitely a journey, and it's not a short-term one, it's a long-term one. And a lot of the things that have been said today really bring that home for us, because the way we're looking at this is looking at it from a very holistic, intersectional way. So the way we approach our work is really looking at the things that are sort of really operate at the gaps of a movement. And UMI Fund was founded for a group of philanthropies to work at those gap spaces. So we're doing things like looking at making sure that there's security support for you, making sure that there's opportunities to have things like rooms and funding to be able to do the work. We are also trying to do this work in a way that, I hate the word capacity building, but it's about organizational resilience, movement building resilience. And, how do we fund in ways that are supporting the movement leaders of today, but also building that community for tomorrow. I think we'll get into the actual mechanics of this later, but we're able to support organizations with very small amounts of funding as well as large amounts of funding, and making sure that it's really fits within where the leadership is actually telling us. So we really make a concerted effort to give in very participatory ways as much as possible. We're a fairly new funders collaborative. We are also contingent upon the funding that we receive from other supporters. So we're constantly looking for other climate funders as well as those outside of the climate space and trying to engage them. We view our work not just about being a rebranter, but also how can we sort of challenge this discussion within philanthropy more broadly to bring others in, because of course, climate is an intersectional issue. It's not just related to a climate funder. There are other funders who are funding in other areas that we're trying to bring into this space. And then, as a funder, we're constantly asking ourselves questions. Part of this journey is really doing that. So we're constantly asking ourselves, and we feel like we have a responsibility. How can we first nurture the conditions to be able to continue to see the movement happen and thrive? And what is it that we need to do, which is why we really do operate at a participatory level and really do try to make an effort to connect funders to field. We host a Friends of the Youth Movement group that meets on a quarterly basis, and it's really looking at connecting these opportunities as well as bringing a greater voice, particularly to voices that are not in the room today. So I think at some point we have to recognize that there is a privilege to being in this room today. There's a privilege to having access to the UN, but for everyone who's spoken today, there's thousands of others who don't have that voice. So we're really working to be able to bring that voice through communications and building the evidence base to be able to make the really strong evidence case about youth movement leadership being critical to climate.
Thank you very much. I'll quickly turn to Mohandra. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think in this room, we've all been witnesses to the power of youth already with the amazing interventions from those who spoke before us. At Frida, the Young Feminist Fund, we are a fund run by young feminist activists for young feminist activists. I really appreciate Shia's point on transparency and accountability. We really see ourselves as accountable to movements. We are here for movements and for no one else. We are not here for the agenda that could be run by certain donors. We are not here to meet certain sort of predetermined metrics of what success looks like or what impact should look like. We are here to be guided by the expertise and the deep wisdom that youth activists have. We are living the climate crisis now, and youth are not just the future, they are also the present. We are also the present. And so, I think it's really important to have that always front and center at the core of everything we do. And if we're guided by that, then we believe we can at least be on the right track. We're learning a lot along the way, things that work, things that don't work, experimenting. We recognize as a funder that we are operating within the system, right? We are operating within a system of capitalism. We are operating within a system that has led to the current crisis that we are currently living. And so how do we shift that system from within? How do we recognize the limitations of that? And how do we support those who are outside of the system, pushing back against it and trying to radically transform it? Groups who are not legally registered because they cannot be, groups who are facing incredible risks at all levels in their work, and who need support, as the panel before shared. And so how, as funders, can we find creative ways within the system to support those who are doing this incredibly brave work outside of it, and ourselves, what is our responsibility? How are we accountable to movements as those within the system to shift and to push back and to transform it, and to, I think, support youth who are speaking truth to power and recognizing the power dynamics within that. When is it our space to speak? Perhaps in an event like this, where we're, trying to share our learnings as funders, where is it our place to step back and to actually support youth to take front and center, and for us to just be backstage, making sure that that we can provide the support that's needed. So I think a lot of lessons. I think just for this first round, the last thing that I'll share is just that at Frida, we really recognize that youth are identifying and tackling the root causes of the issue. They really have a systemic, intersectional, deeply transformational approach, and therefore are sometimes artificial silos are not useful, and sometimes are a hindrance to that, right? So when we say, for example, our environmental portfolio is over here, our gender portfolio is over there, our human rights portfolio is over there, we are ignoring the deeply interconnected nature of the crises, the multiple intersecting crises that we are up against, and the radically transformative intersectional systemic power that youth movements have. And so we need to do away with these artificial silos, and we need to recognize the deeply intersecting nature of what we are up against and the radical power that there is in tapping into that. And so that means being flexible funders, and that means really, recognizing that youth movements and youth activism doesn't necessarily look like the mainstream environmentalism that has been more commonly funded. It might not be as linear. It might not be. It's not static. It's a group might be working on abortion access one year, and then the next year a flood happens, and they're working on sort of direct response to that crisis. And so they're nimble, they're adaptive. And as funders, we need to be nimble and adaptive as well in response to that.
Thank you very much. And please, Megan, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm with Doc Society. We've been supporting independent storytellers from across the globe for over 17 years now. Storytelling is how we understand the biggest crises of our time, but also how we understand the solutions to it. But if we were to limit ourselves to newspaper headlines, it would seem like we're losing the climate culture battle. And I think to Aisha's point, it's because the fossil fuel industry has an enormous amount of resources that they fueled into harmful PR that's helped us to perceive where we stand and this sort of things. But we really believe that artists and storytellers working alongside movement leaders can actually shift the narrative on climate. And that's what we're really here to support. And a lot of it is actually, and as you're talking about the mainstream environmental organizations, it's about challenging what mainstream media deems as a climate story. A lot of it's pushing and challenging a lot of the old tropes, the doom and gloom stories, the old white men in the global north, framing that's dominated mainstream media for decades now. That's not only harmful, but also quite boring, to be frank, and also supporting a new types of stories that truly center those that are from, by, and different communities, stories that center those who've been left out of the conversation, stories that actually engage with the romantics and the comedians and the thrill seekers that are all in us. And so a lot of the work that we do and the stories that we support, some may be a documentary that's on Netflix, but also it's looking at community podcasts that are shared through WhatsApp groups. It's also looking at animations that are posted on YouTube. So really thinking critically about how can we support all these a mosaic of new types of climate stories that are told from communities and that are shared in different ways. And a lot of our advocacy, as you were mentioning too, Chrissy, is like a lot of the work that we do is also funder advocacy, but it's also helping to challenge these norms that we can't just keep telling these old school way of stories, because it's going to continue to alienate a lot of communities, and we're not going to be able to go towards more visions of a more climate just future that we're all working towards. And so a lot of that has been really informed by a lot of the creativity that we've been seeing from youth storytellers and youth movement leaders, because storytelling is so natural and ingrained to who we are. So one of the most human things that we can do. And so we need to also make sure not only providing the resources for that, and I think the follow-up question will go into the types of resources that are going towards it, but also bringing industry and other funders alongside to ensure that these stories actually reach their intended audiences and mobilize them towards collective action goals.
Well, thanks a lot. And I hope that our youth activists are somewhat happy, because I am, because I see that you are learning indeed. I was in a call with a group in Nepal, and so part of my work is also helping groups to access funding. They're describing the project that they wanted to run, and it goes to your point. They describe their solution so complex that you get lost in it, because it's sort of ticking so many multiple boxes that if you go to a donor, you're not so sure how to really pitch it anymore. And I think that requires sort of this learning that requires how do the donor then break that silo boxes that you dedicate funding to be able to have this multi-solving approach of projects to work. And to your point around being very flexible and knowing that there are way more voices than what we already know, and being able to bring them also onto the table to be able to share, to sort of open our brains and our minds to the different possibilities of what people want to do. And then, Mega, your point around sort of like community podcast. In 2015, there was a flood in Ghana, and my organization worked with the disaster management office in Ghana to sort of get messages across on flood warnings, early warning system. And the best way to do that was to use WhatsApp. But then you need a sort of infrastructure that can validate the information and make sure that it's credible. If not, nobody's going to take it serious. And being able to have resources to do that, one is not an organization at every community level, but you need to also have a way of tracking accountability and making sure that wherever you send the few CDs to, it's also not going to the wrong thing. It's different layers of sort of accounting that hasn't really existed anywhere yet. So I feel like the learning is really there. I'm very happy to see that. I'll pass it on to Heather. We'll go on to the next phase.
Yeah, I really want to dig into this learning, in this next round of discussion to really look at the mechanics and the models of how do we shift funding. And, we're lucky to have some really innovative funds represented here. An example that our fund is pursuing right now, we're actually turning over our whole board. I currently report to a board of my funders, the foundations that created the Climate Justice Resilience Fund. They've decided to turn over that authority to a new board that will all be activists and practitioners. It will include youth and women and people from around the world who are on the front lines of climate justice. So that structure is changing very quickly. We hope we're in the middle of it. What are some of those changes in your funds, and what are some of the innovative models you're pursuing now? Christy, do you want to start off again?
Sure. So this idea of innovating, learning, adapting, iterative process. So that's how we operate, across all of our program areas. So specifically for the youth movement, last year we launched a youth movement fund, which was managed by a committee of youth. They were actually the ones who were determining where the funding was going. They were very tough. It was a very, very tough process, but they actually managed to distribute around 70 grants through this process, and then we're looking on expanding that in the coming years. So that's one thing. Another thing I mentioned before, we convene the donors on a regular basis, and out of that convening, this issue around security and youth activists really came to the fore. So we worked with an organization called Kamar to develop a youth security report. And sort of the second phase of this is really to establish youth hubs to do things like Shia was mentioning before about providing the additional operational resources, the legal, all of those sort of necessary evils that have to happen to be able to operate in a society where you have philanthropy. We're really looking to bring that to the wider community, looking at starting in 2 regional places in the beginning. And then, of course, we're working on the narratives. We work with organizations like Dr. Society to really bring those voices to the fore, just as Megan was saying earlier. And then last but not least, we are also in the process of developing a partnership with youth leaders who are trying to set up the youth movement, the Youth Climate Justice Fund. So we are really exploring ways to, how can we work with them to be as a supportive and equal partner. It's definitely a collaborative co-creation process, and that's how we do all of our work, but it becomes even more important, I think, when we're working with the youth population. So those are just 3 of the things that we're doing now, and of course learning, and so watch this space. Who knows what's going to happen in the next couple of years.
At Frida, we're a participatory grant maker. That means that the funding decision is determined by the priorities that are selected by applicants themselves. We believe it's a way, one, of collectivizing the process, of making sure that the decision-making is being determined, recognizing the expertise that young feminists have, that they know best what the biggest challenges are, what the priorities are in their particular context and regions. It's also a means of transparency, so that applicants can see who else is applying, what other kinds of work activists are doing in their particular context, and learn from that. And we also work with a network of global young feminist advisors who are almost 100 young feminist advisors who also support Frida in the grant making process, and also generally to determine our strategies as a funder. we strongly believe that one, again, we are accountable to young feminist movements. So having these participatory mechanisms in place is core to who we are as an organization. We also believe that young feminist expertise must not only be recognized in words, but also in money. And so that young feminist activists have to be compensated for their expertise whenever we are developing a strategy that, for example, we can send out surveys or interview folks who are grantee partners or young feminist activists in Frida's network. We compensate that labor just as any sort of international nonprofit would pay a consultant to come in and advise on their strategic direction. We seek to compensate young feminist expertise. Frida also has a funding plus model, which means that we don't only give core flexible grants, which is determined through the participatory grant making process. We also have capacity strengthening grants, travel grants, collaboration grants, convening grants, post-convening grants. In the context of COVID, we also launched a emergency response grant mechanism as well. That said, Frida is not a rapid response or urgent response grant maker. We recognize the limitations of the participatory mechanism is that it takes time. And so we seek to build alliances with others who do have mechanisms in place to make funding decisions within a 24 to 48-hour period in the case of emergency. So I think, sharing that also to say it's important to recognize one's own limitations and to build alliances and to see that we are one element within a much larger ecosystem. In Frida's case, we exist within the Women's Funds Network and other peer funder organizations who may have systems in place that we don't have, and where we can collaborate and complement each other and build on each other's strengths. So I think also moving away from a competition approach to a collaboration approach, which is also in par with moving away from a scarcity to an abundance mindset, which is what ecofeminists and young feminist activists are, showing us about every single day as well. When their work is based on the sustainability of life for planet, for people, and really centering care and well-being. What does it look like for us as an organization to also center care and well-being for those who work within the organization, right? Frida's, in the context of the pandemic, shifted to a 4-day work week, for example. We're developing new feminist human resources policies internally and developing those collectively and learning a lot about that in the interim. And again, seeking to share these learnings out with other organizations. So, and we don't see these pieces, again, as disparate areas of work. This is all about care, well-being for all of us. This is about building the change we want to see right here, right now, right? Within our own organizations. And this is another point I wanted to make is also staffing, right? Like who are young funders hiring? What is what are the professionals that we are sort of recruiting and supporting to develop and to learn about philanthropy? As a young feminist funder, we really try to hire diverse young feminist activists who reflect the groups that we work with, who can learn about philanthropy and grant making within Frida, and when they transition out of Frida, can move on and share that back to their own communities and movements as well. So what role do our organizations play within the wider movement ecosystem as well, I think is important to consider, again, as we shift from a competition to a collaboration mindset, from a scarcity to an abundance mindset. So those are just a few pieces of the specific mechanisms and kind of programs that Frida has in place. Just one final piece is that Frida is also, we also have a big part of our work is also in advocacy, specifically philanthropic advocacy, recognizing that is the space in which we can and should have a voice to share about our learnings, to share about our challenges, to learn from others, and to support our peers to also shift their own internal practices. And again, recognizing that we are part of a larger ecosystem. So advocacy and supporting young feminist advocacy is also key, in addition to providing core flexible funding.
Thanks. This idea of an ecosystem is really important, right? And for the funders, listening to both Christy and Mahendra, the relationship of funders with their grant partners, but then also with other funders, really needs a lot of attention to get these approaches right. Mega, do you want to come in here? What's working? What is Doc Society working on for new models and approaches?
There's so much to say, but I know we're tight on time, so I'll just address some of the needs that came up. But also, first and foremost, I would just want to also give gratitude to your team, Heather, for inviting all us fellow funders into your own learning process. You've hosted a series of webinars, and we've all learned a lot from that. So in the spirit of learning, thank you for that. A couple of things to note just based off of today's conversation. So one, when we talk about the stories that we support, we intentionally use the phrasing climate themed. As we know, climate is intersectional, and we really trust the creative process for the stories, the best stories, the most personal stories to arise in the way that it naturally flows. And so we don't want to ever get caught ourselves into a tick box kind of situation. Did they mention certain buzz phrases or not? Because at the end of the day, you're not going to have the best stories if you do that. Second, the type of grants that we give, and this is really unique for the storytelling world, is that we provide grants that support both production of the actual story and for the impact campaign to ensure that these stories are actually reaching their intended audiences and doing so in collaboration with local movement and local movement goals. So making sure that both things are supported and that there's resources for that. How these resources for production and impact campaigns are used, we're actually quite flexible on. So, for some people, it may be for editorial needs and buying equipment and staffing up. For others, it may be about safety and security concerns for the story's participants. It may also be for providing mental health support for the production team that's involved. And so these are all conversations that we have with our grantees, very much knowing that there's so much more than to just telling the actual story. And we want to make sure that we're able to provide that type of support. In addition to financial, the actual grant, we also provide a suite of services and support to all of our grantees. So that's everything from helping about story development, about impact campaign strategy development, connecting to other climate experts, connecting to lawyers. We have a lot of lawyers on call, to help with a lot of whether negotiations or security concerns, right? Those are all, again, really important things, and that are all responsibilities for the stories that are told. And so, so that's a lot of our grant making that we do is very much focused on the comprehensive act. And then I feel like there's a whole other discussion we have about how we change how we're pushing both the application and the reporting side of things to make it a little bit more.
I think we might have some questions from online, Josh. Did we get any Zoom questions?
We have some questions. I'm probably going to save it for later. And now we're going to quickly switch. Great. So again, I think this is a session of reminding everyone how tight we are with time. But quickly, what I'm quickly going to do is, so this panel is just going to look at everything we've had so far. I think Paloma very interested. So Paloma is with the YAG. From Brazil, very good friend of mine as well. So happy to have you here. What I want you to do, Paloma, is to quickly, you've heard from fellow activists, we've heard from some of the donors or funders, and what I'm keen hearing from you is that from the learnings they've shared and their vision, do you think there are still things that they might be missing that must have been left out, that you think that is very important, that you really reinforce that for the community and for the broader group, including myself and all the work that we all do, that we represent, if you are able to sort of remind them, okay, don't miss out on this one, it's very important. So that's what I want you to do. And I think for Anne and Laura, I want you to sort of tell us what more could be done from what you've heard from your fellow philanthropic colleagues, what more could be done within this space. And we would have Renata also share sort of perspectives with us. So maybe we'll start with that one. And then Renata, please sort of quickly tell us what is being left out, what more can be done. If you can share that with us, that'd be very fantastic. So please, over to you.
Sorry, just wasn't clear. I thought Laura was saying, is it me or should I wait for her?
No, please, Renata, please go ahead. Please go ahead. Okay. Yes.
Thank you for having me online. Sorry about looking a bit flat, but hopefully we can do that in real life soon. I guess I'm quite new in the position of a funder. So I think I'm in a constant learning journey. And I come from a background of being an activist on the ground, also as a young person founding my own organization when I was 21. So when I was listening to the other panels, I got goosebumps so many times of like, oh my God, can't believe that's still happening. And the emergencies are so much further away. So I think probably I had other things in mind to say, but I guess
Go ahead, please go ahead, share with us.
Yeah, no, it's just that I think having activists on the position of funders, not on, but in very different layers. So as participatory processes to collectively decide who to give funding for, or as employees of the foundations or part of boards. There are so many levels that these positions should be occupied and shared. Otherwise, if it's just as a consultation or here or talk here, I think it's less effective. If we're talking about systemic change, all layers of participation should be distributed, and it's really hard to include all the diversity that we think should be included in terms of global north and south, genders and races and ages and causes. And I agree, someone before mentioned like how we should actually focus in working collaboratively in order to go further. But I'm also aware that it's easy to say that in a position of funders that I know we can pay our bills in the end of the day, and I'm not struggling to get $12 as someone else said. So it's very delicate stating we should be doing this and we can do that, when I know it's very different being on the ground and having your life sometimes threatened. But maybe I can share 2 inspiring practices we have been doing so far at Be the Earth Foundation, which is a very small family foundation, works in a hybrid model that is both impact investing and philanthropy, trying to align both, because that's also another whole topic for a different event, how most investments that feed the philanthropy are actually damaging a lot, and they come from very terrible industries that we're fighting against, and that's very incoherent. But one way that we're doing that is created by Marian Weber, called Flow Funding. So we choose people we already have relationships that are activists, that are in touch with people very grassroots on the ground who wouldn't have access to grant making, to grant applications or anything like that. And they basically get their money on their personal bank account. So also like trying to include accountants to make sure they're not taxed or making anything illegal. And they choose who they want to distribute to, how much, to how many people. And all we ask from them is the stories, but not only the successful stories, but also the challenges and how they share also that is in the beginning is like a gift. Wow, I can make this decision. And it's also very overwhelming having this power, and how can I make sure I'm making the best use of these resources to go to who needs the most. So it's quite interesting shift of position that I'm personally going through as well. So it's quite interesting process. So that's one way in terms of like how decentralized and actually totally detached from where the money is going and how far it goes. And we have amazing surprises. Someone just shared the video that I explain a bit more about it. Also on that website, you can check some blog posts, some other videos of things that happened through this funds that were not that big at all, and sometimes literally $100 get so far. I know we're short on time, so I think I'll pass on, and maybe I can talk about the community of practice later.
Thank you so much. I mean, the idea of Flow Fund fits very well with some of the concerns raised by the panel already in the past, and I know that definitely this has been a very good model for grassroots organizations to be able to receive money without having to go through any wrong or ridiculous sort of due diligence when money is needed right away. So that is definitely something worth mentioning. So I will come to my group on my right, and I will start with you, Paloma, and for you to see sort of what do you think have been left out, or what would you want to reemphasize and say this has to be there? Don't forget about it.
Okay, this is a difficult question, right? Because when we think what is left out, we also have to think who has been left out of the conversations at the table, who is not here. I know everyone knows me a little bit, I think, because I am the youth advisor together with my colleagues here to the Secretary General of the United Nations. But first of all, I am a Latina. I am a Brazilian. And for me, there is no, I am doing this work, I am doing that thing, I am a lawyer, I legalized all the youth-led organizations together with my friends. No, we all did it collectively. I wrote together with Joshua like a few years ago. We tried to reach that SDG in the first Youth Climate Summit at UN. We engaged 200 youth to write a letter. It was not an easy process. But we have a youth advisory group, something that we recommended a few years ago. So I know the importance of being here. And besides being a collectively person who understands that it's not about me, but it's about the organizations that we are working with. It is about the people that it's there, together with the forest that is standing with their own bodies under violence, under threat. It is about all of us. And I was just starting about the youth advisor to the SG, because this is what you know. But you don't know maybe that I am also the advisor to the Dajeka Papepi organization, which is the youth-led organization from the Munduruku people, from the Mebengo Kranure, which is the Kayapa one, the ones in the Middle Xingu. I have so many titles as advisors. And for me, I think these ones that you don't know are the most important ones, because it is where the real action is happening. It is what you can do with funders, really change and sustain the entire world that we are living in. And in this sense, Joshua asked me to say what is left out, what we cannot miss. I think she did a great job on saying we need less bureaucracy. We need to access funds that are not attached to so many bureaucracies. Because when Joshua asked the first questions like, what is the gap? For me, the first thing that came to my mind, the gap in all of this is losing the ability to dream, because I have to be in my computer translating everything, because my colleagues doesn't understand English, because I have to be doing all the things to the founders so they understand what are the things that we earn and what we spend our money with, because I have to be going there to the communities, taking their view because they don't have access to internet, then coming back, then calling by radio, then trying to see if solar energy works so I can take out questions. But I mean, why was that? We need like workshops, we need to understand, we need to have funders that are not just grantors, but our partners, our real partners where we can ask, where we can have doubts and we can construct together. We need funding for staffs. We need funding to access to internet. We need funding for our organization needs to pay light bills or whatever. And we need your support on that. And the question is what is left out? For me, what is being left out of this conversation is how we are going to move forward. Because I think once again, young people came here and we are telling you the truth. What are the needs? What are the things that we are doing? I cannot be in a situation where I was doing a workshop to 110 youth indigenous Munduruku, and people were doing an entire fuss because I was asking for $600 for food for this 110. And what is the point? I had to spend like half of my day trying to find someone to give me $600 for 110 young people to eat, to construct what is the plan that they have for their own territory. So this doesn't make sense for me. Why not we use better our time engaging, doing the initiatives, doing the projects that we've been doing? And I think this is what you can provide. You can give us the chance to keep dreaming, to keep sustaining this entire world. So that's it, what I think it's left. Thank you.
Thank you, Paloma. That's so many things you said. And I guess I'm going to reframe my question a little bit after hearing from Paloma. So sorry to pick up on you. But what I want to ask you is the question around how do we move forward? Because people came with expectations, she's rightfully pointed out. And I think sort of try to speak on behalf of the other funders. They're not probably going to be happy with what you decide for them, but how do we really move forward? How do we get a bit more ahead of these very little incremental steps? Because obviously we don't have time. That is very, very urgent. And we need to move at a scale that is way, way more than what we're doing now. And I think that will require really massive changes. So I'm going to count on you to really inspire us now with how do we really move forward and how do you challenge the community and ecosystem to really make those steps. So I see you're still thinking, so I'll probably become.
That's fine.
So
I can answer with anything. I don't know.
Thank you. One of the answers for how we move forward is more conversations like this, first and foremost. There's another piece of the story, I think, that's not quite being reflected today, which is the opportunity narrative. Philanthropy is exploding on climate. That 2% figure that you're talking about is probably 4% now. And that's just in the last 2 years. And that's not to necessarily condone philanthropy. I think in an ideal world, looking at your point earlier in the system in which we're operating, philanthropy wouldn't really exist and billionaires would pay their taxes. So, these are the constraints that we're operating with. And for our role as a regrantor, my job is to go to a board of 6 different funders and convince them to fund things that come to us. Each of those 6 different funders has their own board that they report to. Right. So understanding that in our advocacy and in terms of the conversations we're having with different funders, I think is really, really important, because what's happening in this space of opportunity is this explosion. So the established endowed philanthropies that have been working on this issue for many, many years are all of a sudden funneling more and more money. They're spending more of their endowments on climate change because they're waking up to the fact that this is a climate emergency. You've also got a bunch of new entrants, high net worth individuals like Jeff Bezos, that are all of a sudden just like, well, I'm going to spend all my wealth as well. Now, this growth makes it challenging for a number of different reasons. It means that participation is a question, that particularly with youth, there's a bit of overemphasis on the celebrity. Like, let's focus on the youth leaders with the highest Instagram profiles or the biggest Twitter accounts. It also means that the transaction costs, like, people don't have an understanding of who to go to. So one of the things that to say for philanthropy is quite hard to move money. I know this is the world's smallest violin playing for us right now, right? But what is happening as foundations put more and more money and they're creating more and more regranters, organizations like myself, Heather, and Christy. Regranters are specialized organizations that exist to take that money and then distribute it out to a broader section of the field. In the last 3 years, we've gone from maybe 10 or 12 regranters to about 30. And they're regional, they're thematic. There's a coal regranter, there's a clean energy regranter, there's a climate justice regranter. I'm the multilateral regranter, so I do the COPs this year. We should chat after this. But what that means is the landscape has shifted massively, and people don't know where to plug into it. You don't know who to call for that $600, right? And so there's one of the big gaps that I see, and one of the areas that we need is greater collaboration, but also the auditing. Omni, I think the point that you made there was really smart, and I'd be interested to talk about that more. Another big request that we're getting a lot and we're trying to transition to is core funding. But actually, these organizations just don't have the money to just do the work in the first place. A lot of the regranters are set up to provide project-based funding, which is very different from paying staff. So, to give you an example, we were able to fund the huge march and mobilization for COP26 last year. So we put all this effort into the COP26 coalition, bringing youth in, but that funding ran out post COP26. And so all the work has had to start again for this year. But the learning that we've been able to do is to provide core funding for 2 years for the COP27 coalition. So all of that infrastructure that's getting supported actually exists beyond the Sharm el-Sheikh horizon, that it continues into next year, and it doesn't just fall off a cliff. That's quite rare for regranters, because most of us are only funded year to year.
Yeah.
So we're going back to our board every year and asking for more money, which means that we can't make grants beyond what we have in the bank account. So challenges there. But I think the opportunity to move. Curriculum is another area. Jesse, I'm so glad to see you. I don't know if people know Jesse Tolkien, but we are not necessarily new to this. Like, there has been an explosion of youth energy and movement building in the last few years, and it's tremendous. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we had infrastructure for youth to be trained on how to be campaigners, how to do advocates, how to run organizations, how to talk to lawyers. There was a thing called Power Shift established in 2008, and it ran for about 4 years. And it trained thousands of youth advocates. Yeah. It trained thousands of advocates around the world. It wasn't perfect. There were challenges with it. But we know how to do this stuff, and it's not getting done right now. And I think there's a real need for that training. The final thing I would say is what comes next is infrastructure. I kind of hate this word from a philanthropic point of view. But to security, you were mentioning the Kamara stuff that we've been working on together, Christy. I think a lot of activists are putting themselves at risk, great risk, especially those in the global south. There needs to be greater security. Some of that's training. Some of that is we're partnering with the Equation Fund, for those who don't know, to set up a legal defenders hotline, so that activists that get arrested have a phone number they can call and get support. So that's another big piece of it. And psychological safety, I would say, definitely comes into that as well. And many funders, I think, are beginning to kind of wake up to it. Now, there are still some big challenges. Participation is definitely one. The other, I think, is that, to be honest, whilst it is slowly changing, many funders don't necessarily see movement building as a strategy. They see it as a tactic.
Yeah.
And so they invest in it differently. There are some of us, I think you and I included, that are trying to change that dynamic. But we're in a machine, we're cogs in a machine, and we have limited ability to move that entire machine. We are trying. The other challenge that I would say is the communication. A lot of funders don't know how to talk to you. There's real questions around, when you say something, what are they hearing? And so how we manage that translation, that's why I think spaces like this are so great, and really grateful to the Climate Justice Just Transition collaboration to make this happen. So I think I will leave that there in terms of what is next. I see quite a bit of opportunity, but it's not without risk. And we do know that the infatuation with the sort of celebritization of parts of the movement, we know that the historical, funding the big organizations to continue to do the work, all of those risks are at play. But I think there are a few organizations working within the machine that are trying to help change it. And welcome, your partnership and your collaboration on that. So
thanks a lot. And quickly, Laura, please.
Okay, it's quite hard after all of what we have already heard. I think that one of the things that I have been thinking about from our working global green grants, and together with all the context that Ian just provided, is that there have been effectively a lot of shifts, and things are happening quickly all of the time in the ground, like Aisha was just telling us as one of the many examples here, but also in philanthropy with pledges of billions of dollars that I can't even comprehend what that actually means. And we are seeing that there's a huge bottleneck happening between those pledges and that the interest that is slowly happening more and more towards the recognition of global grassroots movements for climate justice solutions. And the huge needs across many different angles from how social movements happen. And Paloma gave a beautiful example of that really centers on the ability for movements to continue dreaming and the structural needs for that. And we just heard today the long list of things that we have been shouting at philanthropy. Long-term approaches, flexibility, participation, accountability, rapid response, fast funding, but also general support and long-term approaches. All of that makes me ask the question, we're trying to fit all of these more and more and more into an institutionalization that is colonialist. And we're trying to fit that into banking models and banking systems that restrict us from continuing to do that. And that's the struggle that we as regranters are struggling with, because we are already recognizing that all of those are important. But how do you support a dream? How do you support a collective dream in these systems? Do we actually change philanthropy, or do we need to move away from philanthropy? And that is not just an existential question that really doesn't have an answer. I think that calls us to think about the whole sector. We are a group here together that's very small, and we shouldn't be proud of that. We should actually be thinking about, and I know that you hate that word, you said the infrastructure. I do think that we need to unionize to be able to change the structures that we have. If we start thinking about, if we continue to think about from a scarcity mindset, like Mahendra was saying, it means that we are only thinking about our own existence, and the systems have put us to think about that. I'm not blaming us for being in a world where we are thinking about our own subsistence. We as funders are definitely much more capable and have a lot more possibilities to think about the general structure. But even as regranters and as public foundations, we struggle. Until we get our budget secured, we can think about another thing. But the intelligence of nature tells us that until we shift that, and we need to shift that and be courageous by thinking about the whole sector from a perspective of generosity, trust, and collaboration. And what does that mean? I think that we need to still do a lot of things. We are not necessarily sharing resources together. We are collaborating, but we have our own resources. And that makes us be extremely vulnerable to the shifts and the volatility that philanthropy, because it's colonialist, puts us in. There is a lot of need for more representation of youth-led movements, but also all of the different populations of the people that are mostly affected to have their own regranting entities in the global south. And that it needs to happen from a very political, clear commitment of the regranters, like the one I represent, Global Green Grants, who are based in the global north. We need to have a political commitment to not only shift the numbers that we heard today, but shift where the numbers are. Because that 2% and those regranters are mostly in the global north, and we're not enough. So, and what is the relationship between global north regranters and global south regranters? Are we thinking that in the long term we need to cease to exist or not? And that puts us in a different political situation. So we need to think about that too. Like, what is our role in really providing the support as regranters that have more experience, like Green Grants 30 years ago, to new philanthropic entities that weren't there before. When we set up, we were unique. We're not unique anymore, and we should never be unique. We should be a lot more. And for that, we need to think about forming from a collaborative perspective, but truly collaborative in sharing resources and unionizing for one political voice to reach out to the Bezos and the new billionaires who are disrupting places like the Congo Basin, because they're pouring millions and millions without any plan, and thinking that that social change can happen like Amazon happened. In 5 years, you create something and you're there. And yes, there are private foundations that need to be changed, like the one that we're sitting here. But there is a combination of disruptive money happening. And until we don't unionize a voice, politically speaking, to all of us together receive money in a collaborative approach, we're not going to reach there because they're going to put us to compete with one another. And that's going to be disruptive for the movement. Re-grantors need to be the sponge that absorbs all the shit from philanthropy, and we don't pass it to the movement. And that is hard, but we need to do it. And we need to do it while thinking about how to disrupt the system together, because the crisis that you're describing, together with more authoritarianism, militarization, closing civic spaces, fiscal restrictions happening more and more, we need to shift outside perhaps the banking system too. We need to give boxes of money or whatever is needed. We need to figure it out together and collectively. So that's a little bit my...
Well, that was more than a little bit. That was more than a little bit. But thanks a lot, Laura and Paloma. I wish I would do a recap of that because I had so many fantastic things. But we are quite crunched on time, and I think there's a question that I want from the audience that I still want to get an answer to. So there's one of them that is asking a question around, I think it's a young person who is already involved with this work a little bit around supporting funders or philanthropic teams and advisors. And there's a question that is particularly asking around foundations don't have strategies that are really addressing these issues yet. So there has to be this idea of changing it really at the root level. So sort of you going to your board and that board going to another board of another board of another board. And how do we really, how would that happen even in sort of within the next few years? Because it seems to be like a long chain of reporting line. And sort of we as sort of the youth movement waiting to get some drops, yeah? But sort of you have this also reporting line to sort of work with. So I'm wondering if anyone has an idea how this could be done. And I like this point concept, really great. And I see a hand there as a response.
I do have a response. I mean, Please. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. I take my mask off to talk. Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Jessie Tolkien. I have so many emotions about everything that I'm hearing in this room. I myself started as a youth climate activist. I guess I'm like now maybe the grandparent age of climate activism. But I helped start Power Shift. I helped start the Energy Action Coalition, which was like version 1.0 of a youth climate movement in the US, which became the Power Shift Network. It was actually Rockefeller Brothers Fund that gave us our first ever investment in the youth climate movement. And somebody did teach me how to ask Michael Northrup for $50,000, right? That is like a critically important thing. I look back, I thought, I can't even imagine, like, who the heck did I think I was asking Michael Northrup for $50,000 for the youth climate movement? But my specific response is like, we need to disrupt the whole damn system when it comes to money. And we can't ignore, obviously, the Jeff Bezoses and all of these like mega billionaires that are putting money in. We've got to navigate those systems, but we also have to figure out how to create systems of money that like from the very beginning don't come with all the bureaucracy. So I'm really excited I guess this is the first public venue where I'm making this announcement, but we are going to be bringing a new fund into the world next spring, a global innovation fund, campaign innovation fund that is going to be specifically designed to get money in every possible way, to send money through M-Pesa, to send money through Venmo, to send money through PayPal, to have all the different kinds of mechanisms and structures available, whether you're a structured organization or not, to get money and move money fast and move money in the way that individuals need. But how is that possible? Well, this source of money thus far has been raised by high net worth individuals who, upon contributing to the fund, agree to have absolutely no say in how the money is spent. Now, maybe that sounds crazy and it's making the money harder to raise, although we've raised several $1 million already into the fund. But it's like from the onset of getting money into the system, we have to be able to access more money into the system that believes in putting power and decision-making in the hands of organizers, in the hands of campaigners. Again, we're not going to forever get out of needing to navigate the bureaucracy that does exist of the philanthropic system as is. So anyway, I just want to put that out there as there's just billions of dollars sitting out there that I think we can put into different mechanisms to start with.
Thank you, Jessie. That is really exciting to hear and a wonderful note to end this on, which I am sorry I have to do. I know there are many hands up. I see one in real life. I see one on Zoom. I think there's probably a million others. But my understanding is we actually can't stay in this room. Farhana?
No, so the Zoom part has to end. I'm sorry.
Yes.
So we do have to say goodbye to the Zoom people and want to thank them for their patience, especially those who have stayed longer.